Senators, 2 votes yesterday on extending Obamacare enhanced tax credits. Is that the end of it, meaning these things are going to go away and Americans are stuck?
Senator Thunes, I think, correctly stated that at this point we need to find a 60-vote threshold solution to fix this problem. It doesn't look like we're there, so then we're going to keep working through next week and see if we can get something done.
Is this a dumb and dumber, like you're telling me there's a chance situation? Or is there really not going to be a resolution before these expire?
I couldn't tell you.
Senator Padilla?
I think the ball's in Republicans' court. The spike in cost, the spike in premiums is absolutely avoidable. That's why we put forward just a clean extension of the premium tax credits. And let's continue to work together to try to reduce cost of health care overall. But let's not let people fall into this crisis of not being able to afford health care or having to choose between paying for health care, maybe paying your mortgage or your rent, or paying for food, your rising energy bills, or your rising water bills. That can be avoided. And look, I'm a little bit optimistic. A couple months ago, when we first voted on the Democratic plan, a couple Republicans crossed over, voted with us. Yesterday, there was 4. And so maybe in time, with a little bit more outreach, a little bit more sharpening of the pencil, we can pick up the sufficient bipartisan support.
What if you went from 3-year extension to 1 year?
Look, I'd be open to that if that means getting, people avoiding this fiscal crunch and not being able to avoid health care.
Would 1 year work for you?
I think that the reality is, like Alex said, both sides, I truly believe both sides want to bring down the cost of health care. I mean, that's at the end of the day the goal here.
Right.
Now, we can say...
But you know and I know that's a complicated argument.
Sure,
it's a lot of policy and a lot of
that's how we got here,
there.
though. But that's how we got here. Was this is so complicated, let's just kick the can. And then we kick the can a year and 2 years. That's how we got to $38 trillion in debt. That's how we got to expensive health care. This is complicated. Let's just patch it up for a year to 2 years to 3 years to 5 years. And before we know it, we never fix these problems. And I think as someone who's relatively new here, I'm saying, listen, both sides want to bring down the cost of health care. And the Affordable Care Act, the Obamacare paradigm that was built, just factually has driven that cost up. 247% increase in premiums since Obamacare was passed. So if continuing to grow Obamacare and add more money into it is going to be our strategy, we then have to look at the data of what supports that strategy. The data is that drives costs up. So both sides want to bring it down. Both sides want pre-existing conditions covered. Both sides want Americans to have access to affordable and good health care.
Quality health care.
Exactly. But clearly what we've been doing on affordability hasn't worked. And if we're going to keep saying, well, this is too hard to solve, let's extend it 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, at some point we're not going to solve it. So I think we're not going to solve it in the next week. I think that's pretty clear. There's going to be an interim solution of some kind. And like Alex said, we're having folks cross the aisle both ways, so we're going to sharpen the pencil. But I think at some point in the next year, we are going to have a bipartisan discussion of how do we fix the underlying issue of affordable health care.
I don't disagree with that necessarily, but I can't help but point this out. Look, we've come to the table with other ideas on how to reduce the cost of health care, whether it's tackling the cost of prescription medicines, for example, or imagine inserting a public option. Right, more competition in this space is good for everybody, including in our effort to bring down costs. But for 15 years, I've been hearing repeal and replace, and repeal and replace. Republicans, with all due respect, have gotten really good at repeal. Haven't done it, but you talk a good game. But I've never seen a proposal on the replace side. 15 years.
Yeah, truth is Republicans are in control now.
He's correct about that. Yeah, last part.
Sure.
You agreed with that.
We owe the American people a plan, a cohesive plan from our side. There's no question we do. And I think our conference has been vocal about the fact that we need to be for something. And that's obviously, we have to be for something, though, that we can pass with 60 votes. I think Leader Thunes is absolutely right. This isn't an issue we should pass with a reconciliation. We may have to. As Obamacare was passed with 51 votes, that wasn't a bipartisan bill either. But we'd like to get to a point where health care can stop being a political football for us to kick around the Capitol, because that's what it's become. We should actually be trying to make a paradigm that works for Americans. Alex is absolutely right. Transparency. Our healthcare doesn't operate in a free market model, just like our defense acquisition doesn't operate in a free market model. Yep. We've allowed these incredibly critical industries that are so important for our country, from our national defense to keeping our children healthy. We've allowed these industries to become opaque and overly consolidated and frankly, government subsidized corporate welfare. And the reality is competition and transparency will help many industries, but these two are great examples that the federal government has kind of allowed to be co-opted by oligopolies that don't serve the interests of the American people. So I think we're going to have to solve this problem in a big way next year.
I'm going to ask you an open-ended question. Finish this sentence for me. Immigration policy under Trump 2.0 in 2025 did what?
Secure the border.
Anything else?
Secure the border was the #1 priority. That's what he ran on. That's what's happened.
Any other things come from that policy and its implementation other than securing the border?
Drop in crime.
Senator Padilla?
Look, I think it's created terror and fear in communities across the country, and there has not been a real drop in crime. Actually, to the opposite. When you start diverting resources, not just within the Department of Homeland Security, but even in the Department of Justice, to immigration enforcement that has by and large detained, deported, nonviolent criminals, and you're taking your eye off the ball of human trafficking, drug trafficking, other heinous crimes, because the task forces, the folks in charge of enforcing those laws are redirected to other assignments. I am really worried, not just about potential for additional heinous crimes domestically, but our national security, because the Department of Defense has been brought in to this enforcement as well.
Senator Sheehy, do you believe this administration has only gone after the worst of the worst?
I think any response to 10 to 15 to 20 million illegal immigrants coming into the country, whether they're migrant workers or whether they're transnational criminal organizations, that was a very messy few years. I don't think anybody can argue that having hundreds of thousands of people cross in a disorganized, unvetted way created a huge problem. And I don't think it's reasonable to expect that fixing that problem is somehow going to be perfectly executed and perfectly orderly. That was a mistake that the Biden administration made. That was a bad decision that the American people said in November 5th, 2024. They didn't like that decision. They didn't believe that having, we don't even know how many, that's the scary part, 5, 10, 15, 20 million people flooding into the country in a very short period of time was good for America, good for our economy, or good for our safety in our streets. So I think solving that's going to be tough. And I don't think anyone said it was going to be perfect.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's expecting perfect. I do think people are expecting to respect for the Constitution, respect for the law, respect for fundamental rights, and to not be lied to, right? For how many times have we heard the President of the United States say we're going after the worst of the worst, those dangerous, violent criminals, when we know statistically by DHS's own data, the vast majority of the people that are being stopped, that are being arrested, that are being even deported, many without due process, aren't the dangerous, violent criminals. You have the lists. You have the list of who you're after. Focus on them. But what we see happening in Los Angeles, to Chicago, to Portland, to Washington, D.C., now New Orleans and the Carolinas, really child care teachers being dragged out of their classrooms in front of their kids. They're enforcing, detaining people at churches, in hospitals now, and courthouses, people showing up for their required check-ins because they're trying to do it the right way. As soon as they're leaving those hearings, ICE is at the door, ready to detain them. Again, no criminal history for the vast majority of these. There's got to be a better way. There's a more lawful way. That's why the Trump administration has lost court case after court case, and even most recently, the determination by a federal judge that the whole National Guard federalization deployment in Los Angeles, where it all started, was unlawful.
One of the points of connection for you two gentlemen was what happened to Senator Padilla when he tried to ask a question of the Homeland Security Secretary. Do you think what happened to him, the rough way he was treated in that encounter, is emblematic of overreach of the Trump administration on immigration or an outlier?
I think the reality is anytime a member of Congress wants to express their ability to have oversight, that should be respected. And I think there's a fine line between what Alex did, which is, hey, I have questions in a public forum. I expect them to be answered. And I reached out to him afterwards. I thought it was handled very poorly. I think he showed up to ask questions. That should have been respected. But then there's a fine line to be crossed where many other members of Congress, I think, have shown up not to ask questions, but to get YouTube selfie videos and to obstruct. And I think the behavior of many of our... What's that?
To interfere.
To interfere, but not to really interfere because they wanted to get on the news. To have a publicity stunt where they are interfering with law enforcement and I think risking lives and safety in the process. So I think I think there's a fine line that can be crossed. There's a line of oversight and conducting your official duties, and a line of being a disruptive jackass, frankly, which is what a lot of members of Congress have done during this process, showing up to ICE detention centers, partaking in activities that are obstructing our law enforcement and putting them at risk. So I think that's been an embarrassment for us, how that's been handled.
And by the way, I appreciated that outreach because you didn't have to, but you did. And a few of our Republican colleagues did the same. He even attended the floor speech that I gave to the Senate as a body the week following. So look, obviously a lot that we may not agree on, a few things that we do agree on, but fundamentally trying to take this job seriously and trying to find those areas of common ground, trying to be constructive and make progress for the country when we find those areas of agreement.
Do you think it was emblematic of administration policy or an outlier? What happened to you?
I think it was very emblematic, personally. This is a president and an administration that wants unlimited and unchecked power, plain and simple. For starters, Congress, the Article 1 branch of government, has the responsibility to conduct oversight and provide accountability to an administration. But this administration has resisted it every step of the way. So we can't do it through our congressional responsibility because we have a Republican majority at the moment. Then not just members of Congress, but elected officials, community leaders across the country have tried to find other ways, including the legal process. That's why you see so many court cases being filed against administration actions, and a good percentage of them the administration is losing on because of how they've chosen to go about it. It's why you see not just the 6+ million people that came out to protest in the first No Kings Day last year, but 7 million, even more, that took to the streets peacefully just a few months ago. That's why we saw the election results this last November, not just in New Jersey and Virginia, but in Pennsylvania, in California with Proposition 50, in Georgia, in so many places. I think that the country is waking up and standing up to the wrongs that they see happening. It's the way our democracy works. I think we're going to be in for a very exciting midterm election.
Get to Forrest in a minute. One last thing. Senator Sheehy, when you look at what's going on off the coast of Venezuela, do you believe it is principally about drug interdiction, sanctions enforcement, or regime change? And are you comfortable with what you've seen overall and what you've been told about what's going on and where it's heading?
So I don't think those three things are de-linked.
Okay.
When you have a state actor, take Iran, for example, take Libya back in the old days, or in this case, Venezuela, when you have state-backed terror groups where they have the power of a nation state, the economy and the resources of a nation state that exist to fuel terrorist operations, you can't just de-link the two issues. And obviously for decades now, Venezuela, especially the last decade, Venezuela has been essentially a state-backer of terror, just like Iran has been for 46 years. And I think Trump's been very clear, they're not going to induce regime change in Venezuela. I think what we've learned as a nation in the past 25 years is regime change doesn't always work well with us.
But when the president says his days are numbered, meaning Nicolas Maduro, what do you think he means if he doesn't mean regime change?
His point is we're not going to invade and take over Venezuela. I don't think Americans want that kind of activity anymore. Americans have seen a number of regime changes at our hands, from Libya to Iraq to Afghanistan, many of which I was personally involved in, so I can tell you firsthand it's a tough thing to do. And the aftermath is normally where we don't have as good of a strategy on the front end. America knows how to take people out. We know how to topple a regime. So we know how to project power. But the aftermath of rebuilding that government, that economy, is something that we learned is very expensive and blood and treasure, and the outcome is not always certain. But what is certain, what's very clear, is that Maduro, his regime, which is very close, by the way, with Iran and North Korea and Russia and China, it acts as an open sore of instability in our region, has been actively and intentional in killing tens of thousands of Americans for years by filling this country with fentanyl, with the worst kind of transnational crime. That isn't just in Miami and Southern California. It's all over the country. Tren de Agua and all their tentacles of transnational crime are all over the nation, destabilizing and destroying communities and households all across the country. So I went to war, as did my wife and many others, for 2 decades after al-Qaeda killed 3,000 Americans in 9/11. These transnational crime organizations are killing tens of thousands every single year. So I don't think there's anything wrong with this administration identifying the source of this scourge and eliminating it. And taking out drug boats, taking out the cells that are responsible for this is consistent with what our policy has been for the last 50 years, not just in counter-drug, but also in counterterrorism. And the truth is, long ago, we should have combined those two classifications as we are now, that illicit cartel activity and terrorist groups are all too often completely intertwined, if not just one single group.
Senator Padilla.
Because of your honorable service, I think you can appreciate there's what you want to do and there's how you go about it. And to suggest that this administration has been anything but forthcoming and transparent with Congress, forget the American people, just with Congress on what the plans are, what the justifications are, that's been disappointing. Congress deserves to know, and at least the Intel Committee and the other more important members in our House deserve to have the questions answered, because we're not at war with Venezuela. Otherwise, Congress would have been part of that decision making, taking that action, and what is happening in and around Venezuela would be in that context, but we're not. And so, short of a designation of war, declaration of war, then what is the legal justification for our actions there? What's the authorizations that Congress is giving for military activity? This is the Department of Defense taking proactive action without Congress's approval or even knowledge at this point. So the information sharing needs to improve real quick.
All three of us care a great deal about the western part of our country. I grew up there. You represent Montana, California. Forests are a huge issue. Fire is now a preeminent concern for those who govern western states, those who live in western states, those who insure western states. What can Washington do to change the status quo, which is clearly not working? Senator Padilla.
Well, it's an issue I've been working on for years, not just as a resident of California and a former local and state official in California, but now senator for California. The last decade has been devastating to so many people and so many acres of land, millions and millions of acres lost to wildfires. But I do think the tragedy, we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the Palisades Fire, the Eaton Fire in the San Gabriel Valley, as really the impetus for enough is enough. There has to be a better way, and pulling together a lot of the great ideas, suggestions, and best practices into a bill that we worked together on, known as the Fix Our Forest Act. Different than a House version by the same name, but a truly bipartisan, thoughtful bill that puts us on offense when it comes to preparing for, mitigating, or responding to wildfires, to help build more resilient communities, because it's not just rural areas that are burning up. We saw urban areas go up in smoke again this last January, and really try to concentrate the experience and expertise across federal government into one space, not just from a firefighter capability standpoint, but a wildfire intelligence center. Let's combine expertise, let's combine technology, let's work with state and local governments and the private sector to be as smart and strategic as we can in how we prepare for it and how we respond.
Senator Sheehy, if that legislation becomes law, what's different? How does it change things?
It's going to open up more active management of our forest areas, especially those adjacent to high population, high risk fire areas. And I think what we've seen over the past century, as we do in, I guess, all areas in America, as we try to decide what our policies are going to be regarding any particular subject, the pendulum swings. And early in the century, the pendulum swung far to one direction, which was our forests are a resource, cut them all down, take the trees out. And you see pictures of the West, Idaho, Montana, parts of California from about a century ago, and you'll see completely bare mountainsides, no trees, because timber was a resource. So the response to that, especially in the 1970s, 60s, and 70s, the environmental movement gained steam. I mean, people forget, the president who created the EPA was Richard Nixon.
Yes.
Was a Republican president.
Yeah.
California. Yes, exactly. That created many of these environmental protections. OSHA, EPA, endangered species. I mean, that movement grew largely in the 70s, and for good reason. Especially in Montana. Folks in Montana, probably more so than anywhere, the location of the largest Superfund site in the world, near Anaconda and Butte, Montana,
right,
where we saw, quite frankly, the rape of the natural landscape. We saw mountains tops blown off. We saw rivers dredged into straight lines, poisoned water aquifers, just because the focus for so long was get whatever's out of the ground, mine the copper, mine the coal, cut the trees down, and that vicious, aggressive resource economy led to massive destruction that will take centuries to recover from. So the correction of that was, let's protect all of our national landscapes completely. And we overcorrected.
And default to protection always.
And we overcorrected. We got to the point where, all right, don't touch these forests, don't cut down trees. And our timber industry has suffered. Now we have an affordability crisis in housing, in part due to the fact that most houses are built of wood, and we don't make wood in America very much anymore. Used to harvest 13 billion board feet a year from our Forest Service lands. Now it's about 2 in the middle of a housing crunch. So I think the management of our forests, the pendulum's swinging back. We're realizing we can't just put a chain around our forests, put a padlock on it and say don't touch. Because now we're seeing one of the outcomes of that is excessive fuel load, no road access to fight fires, no cohesive policy for protection around our communities. And we're also recognizing that the checkerboarded aspect of our lands out west, is most eastern folks don't really understand it. When you cross the Mississippi and head west, you start to get into a checkerboard land ownership landscape where you can have Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Indian Affairs, state land, Forest Service land, private land, all mixed together, and no cohesive management policy for any of those. So this is a watershed moment. Unfortunately, as always, it takes a tragedy, typically, to have folks come to the table and say, we got to fix this. And unfortunately, we've had way too many tragedies. This isn't the first. I mean, Lahaina, Maui. Most people don't think wildfire when they think Hawaii, but that was a terribly destructive fire. 100 people killed, Lahaina wiped off the map. Obviously, the Palisades fire last January is what brought us together and many together around this. But, I mean, the list can go from Smokehouse Creek fire in Texas last year, millions of acres burned. And, of course, the Paradise Camp fire in California. The list can go on for hours about these terrible events. We've been here before. We've been here before in America where we had terrible fires destroying our communities. And that was in the 19th century, where every city, whether it was Denver, Kansas City, Chicago, the Great Chicago Fire, our cities would literally burn to the ground as fires got out of control. And in the aftermath of those, American corporations and communities got together and said, we need to stop building our cities non-fire safe. We need to come up with a set of codes that secures our residences and our cities from literally being destroyed, burned to the ground. And out of that was created NFPA, National Fire Protection Association, and create a series of codes that structure fires dropped by 97% since 1896. Civilian and firefighter casualties have dropped 80% with regard to structure fires in the last 50 years because of the adoption of these codes. And do you know what codes govern our forest and wildfire interface with our communities? Yeah, you don't know because there is none.
Right.
There is no standard. There's no rule about where the tree line ends,
right.
What the standard is for that tree line around our cities to be protected, how far the houses are to be apart, how wide the roads are, how the fire hydrants are laid out in the community so they don't run out of water during a crisis. Our fire hydrants are designed to fight a house fire. 10 fire trucks, one house is on fire. They're not designed to fight 14,000 house fires at the same time.
The Paradise Fire grew to its massive extent because the first road of entry to put that fire out was inaccessible.
Right. And so we've worked on that in the past as well. Multiple evacuation routes in vulnerable areas. You know, Lake Tahoe is another example where one fallen tree in the wrong road at the wrong time can make the difference between people getting out safely or a true mass tragedy.
So this would create a mandate to structurally and across jurisdictions look at these things and evaluate them from a fire safety
Right, more
perspective.
holistically and more strategically and in a truly balanced way, because you're absolutely right. This is not a timber bill. Let's make that very, very clear. This is a wildfire safety and resilience bill. Better forest management, right? Let's take out some dead and diseased trees. Let's take out a lot of the dry brush that serves as the kindling for a small fire to become a huge, out of control fire. Let's make it easier for the fire break activity, for example, to be approved and happen more quickly. There's so many instances in the Eaton fire last year. There was projects that were delayed that if they would have been implemented would have kept that fire from erupting. You look at other parts of California and have forest rangers and firefighters telling me, you know, because we had these measures in place, right, the fire mitigation work that took place the summer before, that helped contain this fire from spreading and costing lives, if you know, not more.
And a really important aspect of this is more fire. We want more fire. Prescribed burns. Our natural landscape is meant to burn. Mother Nature designed it to be burned, depending on the landscape, every 3 years, 7 years, 11 years. You know, it depends on where you're talking about and what the foliage is like. But we have, in many cases, stopped allowing the natural burn cycle to happen. And it's healthy for a forest to burn. That rejuvenates the forest. It clears out the underbrush, puts nutrients back in the soil, makes our neighboring environments healthier. And the prescribed burn process to get that permitted and allowed to go is rife with problems. And there are groups that sit there and wait to injunct. Every time there's a clearing project or prescribed burn, it's sued by this group, so injuncted, permitting process. And it can take a decade to get a prescribed burn cleared. So we want to open up good fire, because the best cure to bad fire is good fire. Burn these fire sheds ahead of time. Let the forest burn in a healthy way that rejuvenates that forest. It doesn't destroy it.
Prescribed burns, by the way, it's not a new concept.
That's
it's
ancient.
not a new idea.
No,
right?
no.
We've come to embrace that and utilize that strategically in California in partnership with the Native American tribes. Right, 109 federally recognized tribes in California with a long history and appreciation for land management. So when the federal government and state government are entering these co-management, co-stewardship agreements with our Native American tribes, then we're also tapping their experience and expertise.
But there'll come a time. So preventing fire, protecting our fire sheds is important, but then there comes a time when the line is crossed. Now we need to be able to fight that fire and protect our communities. And as we've seen objectively, there's no question, we've failed as a government, as a federal government, to effectively protect our communities from wildfire, to be able to evacuate people ahead of time, to suppress the fire, to get there quickly, immediately on target. Again, we can go through every fire, but using the Palisades fire and the Eaton fire as an example, we failed as a government to effectively respond to that fire promptly, to fight it when it was small, to evacuate the community safely, and to protect that community. So implicit in many of the bill packages we're pushing through is ability to more promptly and effectively have a year-round firefighting apparatus. So when our prevention projects fail, when the prevention paradigm hasn't done its job, now we can switch to emergency response and more effectively protect our communities.
And I just want to underscore the year-round piece of that. Because once upon a time, not that long ago, there was what we used to refer to as fire season. Right, late hot summer months. That's no longer the case. Fires started earlier in the year, went later and later in the year. Now it's a year-round risk. These fires in Southern California last year was January. It was winter time,
right?
Not the hot, dry,
the rainy season,
summertime, right? Exactly, rainy season. So why is that? Because of our changing climate. We call it, changing weather patterns, whatever terminology you want. But different weather patterns, more intense storms. Both the wet.
The reality of that is
climate.
inescapable.
Exactly, and the winds. That's what contributed to the devastation last January so much. Not just Santa Ana winds in Southern California, 100-mile-per-hour.
They create their own wind force.
One direction, 1 second, another direction, another second. Embers going, all directions. No wonder firefighters got so quickly overwhelmed.
Last question on this. Historically, this has either been a squishy issue or a boutique issue. But to build a broad coalition that gets things across that are characterized as that, you need money behind it, and you need an idea that there's an economic incentive. Public utilities have gone bankrupt over fires, and insurance is a crisis in the West and many other parts of the country because the exported externality costs of insuring these massive disasters. How much does that fit into the ability, you believe, to get this across the finish line?
It's fundamental, and I think bipartisan and industry, state government, local government, federal government, everyone is realizing, too late, I'll admit, but everyone's realizing from Texas to Washington State to California to Hawaii to Alaska to New Jersey. Andy Kim and I are working together, bills, because New Jersey was starting to have wildfires that were harming their urban interface. Everyone's recognizing now that this isn't just a risk to our lives and safety in the communities. This is a torpedo heading towards the hull of our economy because our last recession was kicked off by a housing crisis, by the subprime mortgage crisis. This could look very similar, where we have a mortgage crisis as well, because if you don't have homeowner insurance, what can't you get? A mortgage.
You can't get a mortgage.
And who doesn't have a mortgage? I mean, very few people don't have a mortgage on their home, and that becomes their access.
There are very few cash and carry home buyers.
Right. And that mortgage becomes your liquidity to either invest in investment properties, have enough cash to work in the stock market, put it in a retirement fund, whatever it is.
Then it gets to college.
Most households' wealth derive from the real estate holdings. And if you can't get access to the liquidity that comes from that holding because you can't get homeowners insurance, that's a huge issue. And if it could be 20 to 30% of American homes, when they see homeowners insurance premiums go up 900%, 1,000%, or they can't get it at all, that's a huge economic impact. And it's rapidly becoming the most expensive part of owning a home is the insurance premiums.
Right.
I mean, it's not utility bill. When people look at the insurance premiums and their mortgage, and insurance premiums are more expensive, they're like, what am I doing? Why am I here?
What is going on?
Right. So another great element of the bill, right? Building resilient communities. A lot of why the Palisades fire was so devastating is because so many of those homes were very older homes, built to older or outdated, if any, building codes, too close to each other, what materials were they using, et cetera. So as we rebuild, we've got to build more strategically, better architecture, better not just home design, but community designed to make them more resilient, bring down that risk, bring down the insurance costs, and try to address that economic impact.